So there's an interesting story making the rounds right now on the internet. Phil Collins was recently asked to name some of the songs that have meant the most to him throughout his life, right? And of all the music that he could have chosen, I mean, you can imagine what he's been exposed to, or even the Beatles, Stevie Wonder, Motown, Genesis, right? He ended his list with Taylor Swift's White Horse. And then he went on, he talked about actually seeing her perform it like years ago in a Songwriters Hall of Fame event. It was long before she became this global phenomenon that she is today. And he said he was really blown away and added that she's become the hugest thing in the world because she really deserves it. And I'm going to come back to that. So most people heard Phil Collins is a Swiftie, and maybe that's true. But from my perspective, I think there's a much more interesting story here, because I don't think this is really about fandom at all. I think it's about something that really touches each one of us, and it's the difference between recognition and acclaim. So we're going to get into that today. Hi, I'm Leeza Steindorf, and for over 20 years, I've worked with leaders, organizations, governments, nonprofits, communities, helping people think more clearly, communicate more effectively, and navigate complexity without losing sight of what matters most. And one of the things I've noticed over the years is that some of the best lessons about leadership and relationship and being human do not necessarily come from books. Sometimes actually they show up in the stories that happen around us and that we're already talking about anyway. So if conversations like this help you see yourself or the people around you differently, more clearly, I'd love to have you subscribe and join us for the conversations each week. So back to Phil Collins. So one of the things I admire about that comment is that he wasn't praising Taylor Swift because she became successful. He was talking about a moment years earlier. She was just a songwriter. She had her guitar and she had her song. But he recognized something before she had all these stadium tours, right? Before she had the billion-dollar headlines and she became this cultural phenomenon. I find that fascinating because it really makes me wonder, how does someone recognize that kind of greatness before everyone else does? How did he do that? And I don't think that the answer has that much to do really with predicting the future at all. I think it actually has to do with experience. So one of the distinctions that I've noticed is that recognition comes from discernment and acclaim comes from consensus. Yeah, those are not the same thing. They're actually quite different. So the crowd often celebrates something once it's become obvious, once everybody can see it, right? Someone who has spent decades mastering a craft, they can often recognize that kind of ability before it's been discovered, when it's still quiet. And I think Phil Collins wasn't listening as someone caught up in the Taylor Swift popularity, because it was actually before that. But he was listening as someone who's really spent his lifetime writing songs, performing. He wasn't hearing about her fame or enamored with her, right? He was hearing craftsmanship. And that really makes me curious about something else. If recognition comes before acclaim, why do so many of us wait for the acclaim before we believe in ourselves? So if recognition takes place before everybody else sees it, why are we waiting for everybody else to see it in ourselves? Okay? So I'm curious. I'm going to ask you a question here. Has there ever been a time in your life where someone you knew, or maybe was new to you, saw something in you? Like before you saw it in yourself. Maybe it was a teacher or a coach or a parent or friend, but somebody saw something in you and you hadn't seen it yet. Yeah? If you've had somebody like that, I'd love to hear about that in the comments, because I think those are the moments that sit with us for a long time and we hark back to, because I think they resonate quite deeply, actually. So one of the things I've noticed is that many of us reverse that order I was just talking about, right? We wait for the applause, we wait for the accolades before we actually trust our own abilities. We're looking outside of ourselves for that confirmation that what we know to be true or what feels good to us is actually valuable or worthwhile, right? And we wait for that acclaim before we recognize ourselves. And I wonder if that's one reason why so many people, so many capable people, actually hesitate. because they're waiting for the outside world to confirm something that may already be true for themselves, but they don't trust that. And so stories like this remind me that acclaim often comes later, but recognition, recognizing your value, recognizing your talents, recognizing the gifts that you bring, that doesn't have to come later. And you don't have to wait for the acclaim. Sometimes all it takes is one person who truly understands the craft or the field that you're in, right? One mentor, a teacher, one coach, one friend. Someone who's not looking at the headlines or seeing the promotion or the big house or the increased pay, whatever it is. They're looking at substance. They're seeing something different. And here's something I find really interesting about Phil Collins' comments. He didn't say Taylor Swift became deserving. He said she deserves it. And that's a really different statement, right? Because success did not create her talent. It came because she had something that was really of value, and success came from that. So from my perspective, that's one of the healthiest ways to think about success, right? Recognition and acclaim often come at different times, right? We can recognize our value. We can recognize our gifts. We can recognize our contribution way before other people see it, way before acclaim comes or celebration. So make it easier. Acclaim belongs to the crowd, to out there, to the people that are looking at you, watching you. And recognition belongs to yourself and to people who know what they're looking at. They can see clearly the value that you carry. So I wonder if the most important recognition isn't Phil Collins or the audience or the media's, but it's your own. It's my own. It's the recognition that we grant ourselves. Because when you're clear about what you're building and who you are and why it matters to you, you don't have to wait for anyone or everyone else to agree before you continue. If your work is genuine, that acclaim, that external awareness is going to catch up. Sometimes quickly, sometimes it doesn't happen for years, and sometimes it doesn't at all. But if you recognize it yourself, you're not dependent on that external acknowledgement. It doesn't change the value of your work at all. And I think that Phil Collins was simply reminding us that people with deep experience often recognize something long before the rest of us do. People that don't have experience in that field, whatever the field may be. So if this perspective gave you a different way of thinking about success or recognition or the people who have shaped your life or how you recognize yourself, I'd love to have you subscribed, and I'd love to have you share in the chat box, because we've got a really thoughtful community here and we learn from one another. Each week we take stories everyone's talking about, and we look for the deeper human patterns, I'm going to say, that are underneath them, and what connects us all in our humanity. Because I've noticed that the most interesting story usually isn't the headline at all. It's what the headline reveals about us being human. So thanks for being here. I hope you tune in next week, and until then, be well.